All right, welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. We are officially cleared for takeoff, and we're heading straight into a really fascinating deep dive of GE Aerospace's Q2 2026 Form 10Q filing. Look, if you want to understand the sheer mechanics of modern aerospace, both financially and operationally, you are in the exact right place. We're going to unpack exactly how one of the most critical companies in the world is navigating this era of absolutely soaring demand. Now, to truly get GE Aerospace, you kind of have to wrap your head around the breathtaking scale of their operation. I mean, we're talking about a massive installed base of roughly 50,000 commercial engines operating worldwide right now, and then add another 30,000 military engines on top of that. This isn't just about building new equipment, right? This staggering installed base supports an aftermarket services business that makes up about 70% of their total revenue. When you have engines on that many aircraft around the globe, literally every fractional improvement in your business model scales exponentially.
So, here is our flight path for today's explainer. We'll start with the state of the fleet, move into their surging Q2 financial results, break down commercial engines and services, then defense and propulsion technologies, look at how they're navigating global headwinds, and finally wrap up with cash flow and capital.
Segment 1, State of the Fleet. Let's look at how they manage 80,000 complex engines circulating the globe.
But really quickly, before we look at their internal playbook, I want to ground us. Everything we're unpacking today, every single number, every strategy, is pulled straight from this official Q2 2026 Form 10Q filed with the SEC. We are going straight to the source material to see exactly what management is reporting to their investors.
So how exactly does a giant like GE bridge top-level strategy to actual on-the-ground results? Well, they use this proprietary lean operating model they call Flight Deck, and it's built around 4 absolutely uncompromising priorities in a very specific order: safety, quality, delivery, and cost. By rigorously applying this lean methodology, they're successfully ramping up services and equipment production, all while actively engaging with their global supply chain to improve material input. Honestly, it's the operational heartbeat of the whole company.
Moving right along to Segment 2, surging Q2 financial results.
And wow, look at how that operating model translates into cold, hard cash. Total revenue for Q2 2026 hit $13.3 billion. When you compare that to the $11 billion from Q2 of 2025, you're looking at a massive 21% jump year over year. And this wasn't just some fluke. This revenue surge was driven by increased engine deliveries and improved pricing on the equipment side, alongside a huge uptick in internal shop visits and spare parts demand on the services side. Basically, surging commercial air travel demand is translating directly to GE's bottom line. But the momentum isn't just about the revenue they've already booked. Check out their remaining performance obligation, or RPO. Now, in accounting speak, RPO represents unfilled customer orders for products and services. To put it simply, it's a look at guaranteed future revenue. At the end of Q2 2026, GE Aerospace reported a total RPO of a phenomenal $210.8 billion. That is up $20.2 billion or 11% just since the end of 2025. It tells us that airlines and militaries are aggressively locking in contracts for the future. Now, to really understand this explosive growth, we've got to split the business into its 2 main engines. On one hand, you have commercial engines and services pulling in $9.7 billion in revenue this quarter, and on the other, defense and propulsion technologies bringing in $3.4 billion. Let's explore how each of these segments is actually performing. Segment 3, Commercial Engines and Services. As the heavy lifter of the business, internal shop visits surged 30%, and LEAP engine deliveries jumped 41% in the first half of 2026. You want to know why this matters? Let's put some faces to these numbers. Behind these massive revenue jumps are concrete commitments from the biggest airlines on the planet. Just in the first half of 2026, United and Delta selected GE's Gen X engines for their Boeing 787 Dreamliners. American Airlines and Copa locked in LEAP engines for their narrow-body orders. And Ryanair? They signed a sweeping long-term agreement to service its entire fleet of about 2,000 engines. When the biggest players in aviation are expanding, GE Aerospace is quite literally providing the thrust. But, you know, GE isn't just resting on their laurels and cashing in on today's tech. They are heavily investing in tomorrow. Partnering with Airbus and the Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore, they established the world's first airport testbed for their RISE technologies in the first half of 2026. This initiative focuses heavily on the open fan design, which is pointing toward a future of radically more fuel-efficient and sustainable commercial flight. It's really cool stuff.
All right, Segment 4, Defense and Propulsion Technologies. Scaling military modernization efforts help drive a solid 16% revenue increase in this sector.
And that 16% revenue bump represents very tangible defense platforms actually taking flight. GE Aerospace recently secured a major contract with NavAir to supply T-408 engines for the U.S. Marine Corps' CH-53K King Stallion helicopter. And internationally, they announced an award from Turkish Aerospace Industries to integrate the GE F404 engine into Turkey's Hurjet jet trainer. Defense platforms take years to develop, right? So locking in these engine contracts ensures long-term revenue and solidifies those strategic partnerships.
Which brings us to Segment 5, Navigating Global Headwinds. The filing notes ongoing turbulence from inflation, material availability, and geopolitical conflicts.
Because look, the flight isn't totally without turbulence. So how is GE solving these global supply chain bottlenecks? Well, they're taking control of their own capacity. GE Aerospace announced a massive domestic investment strategy to revitalize manufacturing right here at home. We're talking a $1 billion direct investment into U.S. manufacturing facilities and a plan to hire a staggering 5,000 U.S. workers across both engineering and manufacturing roles in 2026 alone. They're deploying capital aggressively to increase production, expand capacity, and strengthen their yield so they can actually meet that enormous $210 billion backlog.
And finally, Segment 6, Cash Flow, Capital, and Shareholder Value.
We've looked at the operations, we've seen the revenue, but how does all of this translate into actual cash in the bank? Well, $5.1 billion. That is the ultimate proof of their operational efficiency right there. In the first half of 2026, GE Aerospace generated $5.1 billion in cash from operating activities. That's an incredible $1.2 billion increase compared to the exact same period in 2025. It just shows that despite inflation, despite massive supply chain investments, the core business is highly lucrative and generating immense liquidity. And here is why this matters so much if you're an investor. GE has this really disciplined capital allocation strategy, and they are actively returning a massive chunk of this free cash flow to shareholders. In the second quarter alone, they repurchased 6.9 million shares for a whopping $2.0 billion. Let me tell you, when a company with strong investment-grade ratings is buying back its own stock at that kind of scale, it's a huge signal of confidence in their ongoing profitability.
So, we've covered the staggering installed base, that 21% jump in quarterly revenue, and the massive investments they're making in both current manufacturing and future flight tech, which leaves me with this final thought for you to chew on. Armed with a $210 billion backlog, a fortress of a balance sheet, and soaring global demand across commercial and defense sectors, what exactly is the next destination for GE Aerospace? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep exploring the fascinating mechanics behind the companies that literally keep our world moving. Catch you next time.